Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my pleasure today to welcome Chris Merritt, Vice President and General Manager of Ryder Supply Chain Solutions Global Retail Vertical. And we're going to be talking today about retail and the path to executing a smarter supply chain network. Um, Before we get into the conversation, just want to remind all of you who are joining today that, our goal here at Talking Logistics is to really make this interactive and really involve you in the conversation. So as, Chris and I are kind of having our conversation. If you've got a question for Chris, if you can submit it via the submit a question button, I'll keep an eye on it and I'll try to weave as many as I can into the conversation. Also, a reminder, if you are logged in as a guest, you will need to register first, either with Facebook, Twitter, or an email account in order to participate in the conversation and ask a question. So, with that, Chris, welcome to the program. Chris, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you're clipping right now. I did hear you there.
Okay. Well, welcome to the program, Chris.
Thank you.
Well, before we kind of dive into the topic of retailing and the path to executing a smarter supply chain network, I always like to ask my guests, how they got into the supply chain logistics industry, the field. So why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about your career path, how you got into supply chain logistics and why, and kind of what your current role is today.
Okay, glad to, and I'd like to welcome the guests and the audience. I think we'll have a fun time talking about logistics today. I went to school actually and went to Iowa State for transportation logistics. So I started my career very early on in college, very interested in the supply chain and kind of how the analytical side of that and how that got done. Exiting college, I went to work as a consultant, and there's a number of different kinds of consultants. And so what I've learned over time is I'm an implementer more so than a strategic consultant during those years. I worked for Kurt Salmon Associates for about a dozen years, implementing everything from labor management systems, WMSs, built new buildings, consolidated facilities, did transportation strategies, did all the traditional hands-on things you have a consultant do. Primarily focused in the retail space, so that was for folks like JCPenney's and Gap and National Geographic Society and J. Jill and a lot of different retailers, both in the direct space and in the store-based retailing space. After traveling a whole lot as a consultant, I decided to go into industry. So I spent about 10 years running various operations. I was either a COO or a SVP of supply chain operations for a couple of companies focusing on the international supply chain. So I've had sourcing in Asia, I've had sourcing in Mexico and Spain, as well as the supply chain flow goods from that area through the U.S. distribution network and on to the end customer, whether that was a store or whether that was an e-commerce based customer. Did that for about 10 years, and now I'm in the 3PL business. So I'm trying to take that knowledge I've gained over the years and leverage it across multiple accounts. So at Ryder, we're doing pieces of the supply chain for almost hundreds of retailers. So it's really I find it very challenging and interesting because I'm playing in a very broad supply chain, trying to solve a lot of different problems and approaching them from different angles because different companies are in different stages in their supply chain. And so the challenges are different. And frankly, their capabilities and abilities to adapt a very interesting supply chain and do something that really works for their needs is very unique. So I find it very challenging and interesting to constantly be looking at different supply chains and trying to figure out what the right answer is.
Great, great, very, very diverse, background there. I think it's unique in some ways with some of the other executives we've had on that. You've been in the field from an educational standpoint, from a consulting standpoint, from a practitioner standpoint, and now, in the 3PL realm in the services arena with Ryder. I do want to mention that Ryder is a sponsor of the Talking Logistics website, so certainly very grateful for the support in terms of helping us enable what we're doing here today. So let's talk about the retail industry now. I always tell a lot of folks that it seems that industry consultants, the media, technology companies, 3PLs are putting so much focus on the retail industry today. I often joke that if you're like in the paper industry or the steel industry, you're not feeling much love these days, just because there's so much focus on retail. Um, Interested in getting your perspective. Why is retail getting so much attention today? And if you look at it from a supply chain logistics perspective, what new challenges and opportunities do retailers face today, say, compared to 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, and as we kind of thought about that question, it's very interesting to me because if you went back to 2000 and call it 2007, 2008, about the time of the Great Recession, um, dollars spent at retail are down about 27%, and it dove very quickly over the following year as the recession went on, and then it's basically stayed flat. I mean, it's gone up and down a little bit, but it really hasn't moved back. So there's 27% of the dollars that were spent less than 5 or 6 years ago that have not re-entered the retail space. And I think that's what draws a lot of both the consultants and the investors. There was a lot of change that went on. Some retailers didn't survive. We don't have Circuit City. We don't have Linens and Things. But that dollar disappearance has to come back at some point. And there's a lot of retrenching from a supply chain perspective. Your supply chain is very different when you're 27% bigger than you are today. And with the potential for that growth coming forward, and whenever the consumer comes back and decides to start buying again, like they did 5 years ago, the retail organizations all the way through the supply chain are going to have to react to that. And so each year everybody's looking at it and going, well, is this going to be the year that the consumer really comes back and starts spending again? And when that happens, both from an inventory perspective and from a flow of goods perspective, you're going to have to be able to react to it. And so that's what a lot of people are very interested in, is kind of what's going to happen, when is that going to happen. That creates opportunity for consolidation and leveraging and creating bigger players. There's a number of retailers who are trying to find their way. JCPenney just went through a big change. Sears is still challenged. A lot of the e-commerce and Amazon and eBay are coming on strong. So you've got a very dynamic consumer market on the demand side. And then on the supply side, e-commerce is very different from store fulfillment. How do you buy for that? How do you flow those goods? The reality is your ability to predict demand and from a channel perspective is pretty spotty. So how do you have a dynamic supply chain that can react to where the consumer chooses to buy? Because e-commerce continues to get bigger and bigger, although it's a small percent of the total. Eventually the consumer is going to settle on how much they want to buy by channel, and then they're going to be inconsistent in doing that. So you have to have a dynamic supply chain to support that. The other thing I would mention is that on the transportation side of the supply chain, natural gas is a comer. You're going to see natural gas displacing diesel as the fuel of choice sometime down the road. I'm not that good of a forecaster to say when. It may be 5 years, it may be 20 years. But right now, natural gas is a lot cheaper than diesel. There just isn't the supply of trucks, and there isn't the supply of fueling stations. So we've got about 1,100 fueling stations out there compared to 82,000 for diesel. So what's going to happen is as those fueling station grows, some analysts say you get 5,000-6,000 out there, then you can really build a network and start driving that. And that's going to fundamentally change the transportation industry, because the way equipment works today is the owner operators, the individual drivers and small companies that want to provide transportation, a lot of them work the secondary market. So they'll take a used truck and redeploy that. Natural gas is not going to have used trucks for quite a while. We're just working through the right equipment, the right solutions at the power unit level. And until that kind of settles down, the secondary market, the resellability of natural gas trucks is going to be pretty small. So you're truly going to have networks that have natural gas and networks that don't. And unless the government gets involved in heavy taxing or something else that changes that, you're going to have a different supply chain, a different cost structure for the transportation component. And all those things are going to come into the consumer coming back, driving demand, transportation changing from a cost structure perspective. the customer shifting from buying in the store to buying online. A lot of change coming, and it's going to present a lot of challenges to the supply chain.
Yeah, a lot of interesting food for thought there, Chris. I think you're right. I hadn't been aware in terms of the loss of spend, since after the recession. But when you compare that to the growth in e-commerce and everything, all the buzz around omni-channel fulfillment and what's that doing there. And you raised natural gas. I actually wrote on the blog yesterday a blog posting titled "The Tipping Point for Natural Gas Long Haul Trucks." Because we're seeing more activity in that area with
Yep.
Shell and Travel Centers of America announcing the building of filling stations for liquefied natural gas across the country, and we're seeing more developments on that front. So I think you're spot on that in terms of the trends going on the energy side and what kind of things that's going to introduce from a supply chain perspective, not only for retailers but companies across the business spectrum in general. Um, Let me kind of now talk about some of the steps in terms of the path to creating a smarter supply chain network. For as long as I've been in industry, analysts and consultants, have talked about the importance of visibility, right? And that's like uh, it's almost synonymous with supply chain management. Visibility to orders, to inventory, to inventory in transit,
Mhm.
to risks, demand, and so on. But a lot of companies, and particularly retailers, still have a lot of blind spots in their supply chain. So, why do many retailers still struggle with visibility? And do you agree that visibility is kind of the first step, toward executing a smarter supply chain network?
Well, I mean, visibility is a key component to offset the inherent forecasting risk of retail. You're really talking about, I've got 300 and call it 325 million people in the United States, and you're trying to predict what are they going to buy and when are they going to buy it. You are never going to be close. You're just going to be wrong all the time. Consumers don't cooperate. That's one of the taglines when I was running my businesses is no matter how well you plan it, no matter how much history you have to try and decide, well, when do I think I need this inventory? Unless it's a very event specific, if I've got Christmas, I've got Thanksgiving, I've got something that's very time specific, when they're going to buy and what they're going to buy is always an unknown. And one way to deal with that is to be able to see where your products are in the supply chain, have good visibility, and then have good process around making decisions on, do I need that faster? Do I need it slower? If it's slowing down because of something's happened in the supply chain, is that a problem? Right now I have a number of customers who have spring-based businesses, and the weather, particularly in the southeast and in the mid north, Wyoming and Colorado, have just got clobbered by a foot of snow. It's not cooperating. So again, their plans are out the window. They're trying to react to that, and having that visibility is one way to deal with that. If you can truly see where your inventory at, have a good understanding of what the next steps in the supply chain are, when they're going to arrive, where you need them, and then understand if that's still the right thing to do. So many retailers have supply chains that are kind of fire and forget. You say, I'm going to launch this PO, I expect it to be in store on this date, and sorry about that. I actually have to push a button once in a while when my computer locks on me. Okay, sorry about that.
No, no worries.
So many folks really are trying to struggle with, gee, the seasonality, the weather wasn't what we expected, so my demand side is messed up. My stores are only so big, so I've got to only put so much inventory in there. Slowing things down actually is a good thing. They would love to kind of pause things in the supply chain so that I don't end up piling all up at the end and causing an incremental cost that way. So having not only the visibility but also the process is the key to kind of getting a smarter supply chain.
I think related to visibility, I see that Eric here posted a comment in the chat. I'm just going to put it up because I think it coincides with what I was thinking as well as you were, talking. He's Chris. Eric says Chris is spot on. It would be referred to as intelligent visibility. It's what you do with the info that matters. So what I was going to ask was, I think historically people talked about visibility in terms of, just seeing things, right? What's the status of different things? In the supply chain arena these days, there's so much buzz around big data and analytics and business intelligence. So I would think that having coupling just basic visibility is not enough. That you also need to have kind of the business intelligence and analytics capability, not only from a technology standpoint, from a people standpoint, to be able to respond intelligently to the data, the information that's going on. Do you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think you go through stages. There's definitely a continuum of supply chain visibility, and there's some folks that have it somewhat by function. So particularly if you have an international supply chain, some folks have a good understanding of where their containers are at. Or are they haven't been gated? Are they on the ship? Have they been landed in the port? Have they cleared customs? And then they almost hand it off to a whole separate system and set of visibilities and say, okay, let's talk about what happens domestically now. Is it through the transload process? Is it on a truck someplace? Where is that truck? Is it on schedule? Is it going right to the stores? Is it going to distribution center? I've got a plan for all that. That end-to-end visibility and truly being able to say, um, there's a triggering event on the front end, whether that's demand, whether that's um, forecastability. Gee, maybe pink was not the color for the spring, and guess what? It's just not selling well. Or maybe it's selling better online than it's selling in the stores. And being able to understand, okay, well, that replenishment product I've got on the water right now, I want to do something different with that. Because if I send it where it's going today, all I'm going to do is pile up inventory at the stores. They're going to have to liquidate it out of there. My gross margin is going to go down. I'd be much better being able to offer that through online or be able to move it to the south where it is working because it's not working in the north. Being able to make those decisions, crunch that data, not only from a supply chain visibility perspective, but from a demand perspective, and reevaluate the plan and make an update on thousands of SKUs is data intensive, and you need to work the process to make sure that's going to be successful. So I definitely agree with you that there's a lot of data available in the supply chain, and then being able to really process it and use it is a key differentiator for a lot of folks.
Great, great. And Eric, thank you for your comment. Just a reminder to everybody else, if you've got a question or a comment for Chris, you can do so via the submit a question button. And just to tie in that last piece, I've always been one of my soapbox issues with related to visibility and business intelligence is the importance of data quality. Having timely, accurate, and complete information. I think I still believe that is one of the key challenges that companies in every industry still struggles with, because it's the classic garbage in, garbage out, phenomenon. And do you still see that? Do you the ability to have timely and accurate and complete information, is that still kind of a constraint in kind of visibility and business intelligence?
Yeah, that cleansing process and making sure that the data you're making a decision on is complete, and you're not making a decision based on the absence of data as opposed to the data stating a trend that would cause you to make a decision is very key. We have a number of customers we work with that are very focused on just what you said. Let's not put garbage into the system. Let's make sure the statuses and the events we're tracking against are real and not subject to delays. They're not subject to misinterpretations, so that we've got very clean data to make those decisions on, because it's often um, very easy to assume you know what's going on, and you don't. And so that's where you get in trouble. Gets inside your decision cycle. You're making decisions based on things that have already happened and that you can't really influence because it's already downstream from there. So the timing on that, the cadence of, I can still make a decision on this particular event because I know it's still in the future, and understanding where that line is very key to keeping it efficient and not having a lot of resources looking at things that you really can't influence because, boy, that particular PO or that particular carton's already flown by that decision point. So timing is key, cadence is key, and understanding that is very key to having a smart and successful supply chain.
Great, great. So let me move on, and this is another topic that is kind of linked to um, uh, kind of visibility, and that is control towers. I'm seeing a lot of companies across different industries becoming very interested in control towers, either building them internally or working with a 3PL partner or an external partner to create a control tower on their behalf. As I look at it, I mean, the control tower concept is not necessarily new. So why kind of the growing interest or demand for this? And secondly, there's a lot of different definitions of what is a control tower. So I'm kind of curious, what is your definition, and what do you see as the critical elements of a successful control tower operation?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for us, control tower is a layering process. So you need a supply chain visibility tool, so you know where your inventory is at in the supply chain. You need processes on top of that to make good business decisions, and then you need to have controls on top of that to make sure that the financial impact of those decisions are going to be what you want. So it's really a three-layer approach. The best example I can give is what we do for some of the auto industry. We work with the suppliers to the auto industry to flow inventory into the auto factories, and we're on the hook to have the inventory line side when it needs to be there. So as they're building cars, we're literally flowing inventory into that factory, and we work the entire supply chain all the way back to the manufacturer to say, okay, have you scheduled to produce this part, to get it into this shipment, to get it on this truck, to get it through this distribution cross dock, to get it to a delivery truck so that we can get it into the plant on time. And that takes visibility. It takes process to understand, well, if we miss this point, what comes next? And then the question then is the financial implications of that if we have to air freight something or we're expressing something or we're going to skip a step in the process, but that's going to cost us more, is that acceptable? That whole process is really how a control tower should work. You should take visibility, build decision processes on top of it, and make sure that decision processes are financially viable so that you're meeting the trade-offs that can happen within the supply chain.
Now, what is the you talked about process, obviously visibility, and there's obviously technology that underpins a lot of that in terms of the execution processes and the visibility and so on and so forth. What do you view as the role of people in a control tower? I mean, what are kind of the skill sets or the talent that you need to run a successful control tower operation?
Well, I would argue you're never going to automate changes in the supply chain. You always need very good decision makers, very analytical decision makers who can look at a set of data, a set of kind of process rules and say, okay, it looks like we should do this. Does that make sense based on where we're at today? That may be a phone call with the factory if that's what you're flowing into and say, gee, are you guys on schedule? Are there other things going on in the supply chain that even though an example I would give for that is, Superstorm Sandy, we were flowing inventory into the Northeast, even though we were managing carrier problems getting inventory into the area, it wasn't going to matter because the distribution center didn't have power. So you need people in there who can make the decisions, manage the process, help build the plans, because the plans don't build themselves. When do I need this? How much lead time do I need between this step and this step? Does it make sense to have inventory here? What's the transportation network look like? Are we leveraging? Can we consolidate? Can we deconsolidate at different times? There's a lot of decisions and engineering that needs to be done in that process, and it takes smart people who understand supply chain, understands the trade-offs, and can learn and react to what's going on in the business community today. So that there's a key need for supply chain analysts, supply chain engineers, people who understand and can manage the supply chain to get the product there on time.
Great, great. I think you gave some really good examples there in terms of the skills and capabilities needed, from a people side. And I agree 100%. I've always argued in a lot of my writing that in many ways talent is a competitive differentiator, for companies, whether you're investing in talent internally or in the case of a service provider, in terms of the talent you can bring to the table on behalf of a client. So so we've talked about visibility and we talked about control towers, and those being kind of components of executing a smarter supply chain network. What other attributes, define a smarter supply chain network for retailers? So in other words, how would you complete the following, statement or sentence? If you're a retailer, you have a smarter supply chain network if what?
Well, I think you have a smarter supply chain if you're truly reacting to the demands of your customer and the realities of your supply chain. So, to give you an example of that, as e-commerce comes along and we have more customers who are buying online, and there's always seasonal purchases that are going on, whether that's the holiday time, whether that's Thanksgiving, Halloween, back to school, the Memorial Day, July 4th, summer period. You can go through all the different holidays. Customers will give you signals as to what they're going to do. And with the internet, you can get ahead of that a little bit and say, here's the product that's coming soon. Because one of the hardest things to forecast is new items. You just don't know what's going to happen. And you don't want to end up with a lot of new items for a given season that's not going to work, that you have to liquidate at a loss. So one way to do that is to get ahead of that and say, look, let's do a coming soon area on your website that says, these are items we're going to sell for Easter, and both have a projection of what the demand is going to be and then track against that, how much visibility is it, how many customers click on those pages, and be able to take that information and react to it in the supply chain. Gee, we're getting a lot more interest in this particular category of product than we expected. What should we do with that? How do we react to that? Maybe that means it should be in the store sooner. Maybe it means we're going to sell more of that online and we should try and support that. Maybe it means it's not going to sell well, and so we should think about liquidation strategies and markdowns sooner or deeper to move the inventory we have in the pipeline. Those are all smart things to do, but you have to get the triggers on the front end of the process so that you can make those decisions. It's very easy to wait and say, let me see what the consumers do, and then I'll try and catch up. And the sooner you can get them to give you some indication of what what the trend is on these 325 million shoppers that are out there, the more you can react in the smarter supply chain I think you have.
Yeah, great point. That's an interesting approach in terms of putting some strategies in place to get some early demand signals or some early indications, particularly with regards to new products and because you just don't have the data, or it's better than operating on a guess is to be able to put some processes and systems in place to at least get some early signals there. You mentioned something that I think is an area that doesn't get enough attention, I think, in supply chain. I think particularly retail, and that is, reverse or liquid, the liquidation side of things, and that's an area that a lot of retailers can, maximize some margin or some recovery there if they can, have some smart supply chain processes involved in that. Do you see that? Do you see more retailers focusing on kind of the reverse side and the kind of the liquidation, side of their supply chains and what they can do there in a smarter fashion? not sure if it seems, at least on my end, that Chris might be having some a little bit technical difficulties there. Um, I'm going to wait for him to show up. I don't know if he's showing up for everybody else attending. Um, I brought that up because there is from my standpoint, I've seen, more retailers kind of thinking through the opportunity to be able to recover, more revenue on the liquidation side of things, and be able to, that's kind of an area where they can, maximize some profit. I'm going to try to get Chris back up on the screen here. So let me go ahead and invite him back on camera. Hey, Chris, you back?
Am I back on?
I can see you. Can you see me?
Okay, good.
Okay, great. I don't know if you caught my last question there, but I'll
Yeah,
quickly.
I can hear you.
Great. Let me quickly paraphrase my last question.
So I was trying to answer the reverse question.
Yeah. So you heard the question. So go ahead. Why don't you talk a little bit about the reverse logistics and liquidation and what you're seeing retailers doing in that front?
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, one of the ways to maximize your gross margin is to really have a smart supply chain around reacting to pricing, reacting to channel decisions by the customer, um, just dealing with returns from the customer, dealing with how you've purchased the inventory from your vendors, whether that allows for you to flow inventory back to them if it's not sold, or whether you're using a consignment or VMI type model. All of those are mechanisms to try and manage gross margin. One of the questions that I'm getting asked a lot is kind of where's the best place to liquidate, and then how do I support that from a supply chain perspective. So it's unclear whether the key shoppers are going to be in the stores. And when you're, particularly if you have something that has sizes and colors where you get broken sizes and broken colors where you don't have the full assortment, are you going to get the kind of um, dollar maximization by having the customer shop there, or should you try and drive them online and then you flow the inventory back out of the stores back upstream, where you can then support that better from an e-commerce perspective? You can also fulfill e-commerce out of the stores. Um, it depends on what you do with the space that's in the stores. So there's a lot of mechanisms to do that. It's really kind of settling on a portfolio of services so that I do a combination of consignment inventory that I can flow back upstream. I have a strong mechanisms to handle the reverse items that are either coming in for because the consumer, it's not as expected, not what they wanted, turn that back into sellable items, as well as trying to be able to move channels and make decisions so that you maximize your selling price and therefore your margin. Well, there's a lot of components there, and so really building a good portfolio and an adaptive supply chain to support that is a key to kind of making that work for you. It is really unique by which category you work in. If you're in apparel, it's one answer. If you're in electronics, it's a different answer. If you're in home improvement, it's a third answer. So you really need to look at all the components and options you have and come up with the right answer for the consumer, or for the company, and then drive that through your supply chain.
Great points. Last year you wrote a very good blog posting related to lean principles, and I think for a lot of folks when they think about lean, they kind of immediately think about manufacturing. How can retailers apply lean principles within their own operations? Again, within the context of helping to create a smarter supply chain network via lean principles.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, lean is a management philosophy, and you're trying to drive standardization, continuous improvement, and employee engagement to try and continue to increase the capability of your supply chain. Obviously, distribution centers and trucks and drivers are very labor intensive, as well as the stores are very labor intensive. And so creating an environment where both they're doing the right thing and they're also interested and engaged in trying to continuously improve the operation and identify, when things break, when things go wrong, how do we fix that so it gets prevented next time? And really try and build a culture and a management philosophy that drives continuous improvement and execution against the processes you've set up. And that affects the analysts that are managing transportation. It affects the distribution centers, the folks that are planning the supply chain, the folks that are buying the inventory and sourcing it overseas. There's a lot of places where, if we only recognize how often we make the same or the same error causes us a problem upstream, and have a very disciplined process to drive that back upstream so that we don't do it again, and you do get that continuing improvement in the supply chain. That's a key concept behind lean. Ryder is, that's the way we roll. We are a lean operation. We're part of the teams that were doing it in auto, and now we're taking that to other industries. And there's a lot of interest in, how do I do this better? How do I make sure that my people are engaged in doing it better? Because in the end, they're the ones that know what's going on, and they see when things don't go well and can raise their hand and say, hey, this wasn't right. How do we fix this next time? And getting the management in place to say, okay, we've had this particular problem pop up a number of times. What's the corrective action? How do we find out what's the root cause and what's the countermeasure so that doesn't happen again? And that's a key concept. That's a philosophy on how you manage. It applies to any group of people that are doing a similar task. So lean is definitely a tool that works in supply chains in some industries, and the retailers I've been talking to are very interested in, how can that work for me? How does it create value in my supply chain? So I would say that's a trend that's coming in terms of how retailers look at their supply chain and manage the people within.
Great, great. I think that's I certainly see that as a trend as well, and I think it's a very important, piece of the puzzle there. I just want to remind folks that, as we're coming, close to the end of the program here, we've got a couple more questions, but if you do have a question for Chris or a comment, feel free to submit it via the submit a question button. So let's talk about now kind of your current role. Many retailers work with 3PL partners, such as Ryder. When it comes to managing different aspects of their supply chains. What role should a 3PL play in this whole process, and what should a retailer look for? What kind of attributes should a retailer look for in a 3PL partner in terms of helping them achieve a smarter supply chain network?
The way I would think about it is, and again, I'll speak from Ryder perspective, but again, I was on the buy side of the supply chain, running a company for 10 years. So all 3PLs have component solutions to help you solve your supply chain problems. So to a certain extent, when you have a problem in your supply chain or an opportunity that you see in your supply chain, identifying that and then talking to a number of 3PL partners, folks that have the bandwidth and the experience in that particular area, is a good way to start with finding a solution. Often a 3PL can deploy a solution faster than you can internally. At least that was my experience when I was running companies, is that when you want to move quickly and you want to launch a lot of missiles to get a lot of things done, carving off some of those and saying, okay, I can have a partner do this for me. I may take it back in 3 to 5 years down the road, but I want a partner that can help me do that step. And then, they need to be competent upstream and downstream from there. So if I want them to expand their solution because it's working for me, they're a partner who can do more than just what I've asked them to do. So a 3PL is somewhat of a deployable supply chain solution at the component level, and then helping them create an integrated solution that's smarter in how it executes is key. I look at that 27% of the dollars that are not being spent today that were being spent, 7, 6 years ago, and go, when that comes back, most people don't have that much excess capacity in their supply chain. Over the years, they've been challenged to right size it and get where it needs to be. So when the volume does come back, being able to react quickly and have partners in place that can step in and say, okay, yes, we can, you know, increase transportation, increase your visibility offshore, we can increase your distribution network because the business is there and you can capture that. That's going to be key to future competitiveness. So understanding who your partners are and having them be part of the solution is a key way to play with the 3PL providers and have them help you solve your problems.
Yeah, no, good point. One of the things that I see as an opportunity as well, and we touched upon a little bit about it already, is, there's a lot of talk these days on how there's, in general, across the entire supply chain and logistics industry, a talent shortage. And, to your point, when it comes to retailers, having to scale up their operations or, once that spend starts coming back and they're trying to do different initiatives, they may not have the ability to find the talent, or they may not have the talent internally to perhaps do some of that. And perhaps that's an opportunity where 3PLs can step in if they're, assuming that they're investing in talent and that they've got that as something that they could position as a value proposition. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a key observation. We maintain, that's the advantage of us doing pieces for a lot of different companies. We have a pretty deep bench of supply chain professionals that are focused in different areas, and being able to redeploy them and have a pipeline of people that are growing into additional roles. So you don't just get the boots on the ground, but you also get the management team that's done this before or may have just been doing it, for a comparable competitor in another space. That's a key part of what a 3PL does. Is it brings not only the knowledge, but the people to execute it and the physical assets to expand the supply chain and help support your growth.
Great. Well, we have time for maybe just one more question. So let's wrap it up with this final one, where for any retail executives that are attending right now, or who may be watching this program on demand down the road, what advice would you give to them? In terms of what steps they should be taking to kind of make go down the path of executing a smarter supply chain network.
Well, I think now is a good time because a lot of supply chains have shrunk to a certain extent as that demand's come out of the network or comes out of the consumer side. So now's a good time to build that strong bedrock with good visibility and good scalability so that you understand over the next 3 to 5 years, where am I going as the business comes back? How do I build that supply chain so it's very dynamic and very demand centric, so that as the consumer continues to change their mind, you can support that growth, and you don't end up, particularly in the competitive set, if an Amazon comes along and really gets in your space, what are you going to do about that? Because you're going to have demand increasing, and there'll be a land grab by retailers to say, well, I used to be in that category, but that one's looking pretty good, so I think I'm going to go play in that space. And so having a supply chain that enables that growth and that ability to grab that demand and realize it is going to be key. So planning now, getting the visibility and control type functions in place to be dynamic is a key way to position yourself to enable future growth. My 10 years as an executive, I spent about half of those with private equity, and the job was execute the supply chain smarter and at a lower cost, redeploy those dollars to grow the business. That created value, and that was the deal. That's what we were trying to do. And I think that same mindset applies, but here we know there's growth coming. So it's really, how do you position the supply chain to take advantage of that and scale at a rate that can capture the demand when it actually starts to come.
Great advice, Chris. And again, I think we could probably spend hours talking about so many different topics related to the retail supply chain industry, but you've given us some great food for thought and some great advice and things to think about. So I want to thank you for participating today. And
Okay, well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
and I want to thank all our viewers today for your participation as well. We didn't get any additional questions during the program, but if you've got any questions for Chris or myself, or just want to make a comment, you could always do so at talkinglogistics.com. Just go to the page with this episode on it, and you can post a comment or question there, and I'm sure Chris will be happy to answer it if those come in. So again, thank you everyone for joining. Look forward to, like I say, every week, mark your calendars every Thursday at noon. Look forward to seeing you all in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Thank you.